Hi, this is Frid from the Joy of Syntax and English in Color. And today, finally, I am going to resume my video making activity. And I have taken a very challenging topic for that. Well, it's not challenging, but it's a little bit long-winded. It's a big topic. And so bear with me. And here I go. Here it's the nerd alert. So I'm going to nerd out over predicate appositives in English and in German. So the first part of the video will be busy with predicate appositives in English. So that will be interesting for people, regardless of whether they know German or not. All that is required is that they're a bit on the nerdy side. And then in the second part, I will show you a few predicate appositives. Many of them will be taken from mainly one novel, but actually two novels that were written by a writer who lives in the same town that I live in the city of Aachen. So I'm going to quote a few sentences from this book, Letzter Akt, and from this book, Amelie's Abschiede. Okay, so that's going to be exciting. And then I'm going to compare German and English predicate appositives. And I'm sure that you guessed it. I prepared a PowerPoint. I went through a lot of trouble, but I enjoyed it tremendously. So here we go. Okay, so predicate appositives in English and German. And the goal is always to create yummy bite-sized study units for you. Oh, I hope this works. There's this little window where you can see me, and I just scooted it out of the text, and sometimes Zoom doesn't pick that up. Anyway, people said that I should please read what I put on the slides and not talk and have a different text, so I'm going to go ahead and read. Predicate appositives are verbless or non-finite secondary predicates that have been reduced to the status of optional clause elements and that have been placed alongside the primary predicates. I explained that in a different video as well. Predicate appositives can often be considered reduced clauses that can stand in for almost the whole gamut of clauses: main clauses, superordinate clauses, adverbial clauses, relative clauses. Yet they have coordinate force in a way, and thus they support a paratactic style. If you do not know what a paratactic style is, stay tuned. I'm about to make a video about that. And if you're very impatient, you could download the ebook version of my book, or you could buy the paper version. The drawback with the paper version is that it takes a few days or weeks because it's print on demand, but you can download the ebook version immediately. It's just a small hint. Okay, here we go. Next slide. Now I'll move this up again a little bit, and I hope I'm not in the way. Here are examples of predicate appositives in English. I stood there, transfixed to the spot. Transfixed to the spot. Well, I'll just read the examples first, and then I'll say a little bit more about them. I stood there, transfixed to the spot. Jackie sat in bed, afraid of the dark. She stayed up all night sewing. I returned home drunk. I long to sing your praises, but stand mute with the agony of wishing in my heart. That's a beautiful line, I think, from a beautiful poem by the poet Rumi. And all the other sentences are, some of them I made up and some of them I borrowed from George Kerm, my hero. Now, here you see that basically these orange bits with a shadow are the predicate appositives, and they are optional parts in the sentence. Optional as far as syntactic structure goes. All the main clauses are complete without them. Listen, I stood there. Jackie sat in bed. She stayed up all night. I returned home. I long to sing your praises. So, but stand here. And actually we would need an adverbial then. But often, with stand and walk and go, we always need an adverbial. But in context, that adverbial can be implied. Yeah, so here we go. We have these structures that are basically secondary predicates. They predicate something about the subject, but they have been added to the clause like other clause elements. But they are not syntactically obligatory. Of course, they are semantically extremely important, otherwise the people who created the sentences wouldn't use them. And I often like to say that basically you have a 2-for-1 situation. You have one sentence and you can put 2 propositions in there without having a regular subclause. And I'm going to say more about that in a minute and in other videos as well. Now what you can do is you can take these predicate appositives and turn them into complete predicates and then basically create full-fledged, independent propositions. Not prepositions, but propositions. And there are decent and indecent propositions, and of course, I'm only talking about the decent ones. And if you don't know what a proposition is, it's whatever is said or asserted about a subject that can be agreed with or denied. And if you need more of a definition, consult Merriam-Webster's dictionary. And I'm not getting paid to say that. I love Merriam-Webster. Okay, I just already said that. We can turn the predicate appositives into independent propositions. And here we go. The original sentence was, I stood there, transfixed to the spot. So the main clause is, I stood there. And then we can turn the predicate appositive into a full proposition. I was transfixed to the spot. And so you see, I stood there transfixed to the spot is so much more elegant. And we have this, it's more concise and lovely. I love this construction. I love this element. I love that English can do that. Jackie sat in bed afraid of the dark. Jackie sat in bed. She was afraid of the dark. And by the way, this exercise that I'm doing, I'm taking sentences apart and looking at how many propositions are contained in clauses. This is a great writing exercise, and it's a great language exercise because you're actually looking at what the sentence is really saying, and you're practicing putting, by taking sentences apart and putting them back together, you're actually practicing your own reading and writing skills. She stayed up all night sewing. She stayed up all night and she sewed. I turned home, and here we see that the participle, the present participle can actually replace a statement that wouldn't contain a progressive form. That's also interesting. She sewed, we wouldn't say she stayed out all night and she was sewing. We would say in a narrative, she sewed. I returned home. I was drunk. Oh, I left out the original sentence, which was, I returned home drunk. I long to sing your praises, but stand mute with the agony of wishing in my heart. I long to sing your praises, but instead I just stand here and I am mute with the agony of wishing in my heart. Obviously, the sentences that I produced, the ones where I've taken them apart, the originals apart, obviously my versions are horrible, and that's a good point. It just shows the power of this construction. Okay, let me move that out of the way. I hope you could see that. I just moved this little window out of the text. In English, there are 5 types of structures that can function as predicate appositives, and they are nouns or noun phrases, adjectives or adjective phrases, Participles or participle constructions. Some people say participle phrases, and for some that's anathema. Prep phrases, infinitives, both simple and expanded, and absolute phrases. Okay, here are examples in the order of the structures that I read. Leslie reached Edinburgh, a general without an army. So when Leslie reached Edinburgh, he was a general without an army. So in a way, we see that here we have an example of a predicative positive that replaces a superordinate structure, right? When Leslie reached Edinburgh would be the temporal subclause, he was a general without an army. He came home sick. When he returned home, he was sick. Or he returned home when he was sick. But I would say when he returned home, he was sick. So we see that sick is also somehow the more dominant information. Or at least it's paratactic, even though it's a dependent structure. So, and I find that very interesting. You know, we have an incomplete structure, not an incomplete structure, we have just one word, but it stands in for a full proposition. Namely, he was sick. And it is actually a proposition that carries more semantic weight. When I came home, I was sick. When he came home, he was sick. He came home sick. She sat up all night sewing. So here we have the participle. She returned to the house in tears, a prep phrase. He lived to be a very old man, infinitive. And I approached the house, my heart beating wildly. And that's an absolute phrase. And if you want to hear about absolute phrases, I discuss them extensively in my grammar book, which I love a lot. And I can also do a video about that. So just put your questions and your requests into the description box below. Okay, now, predicate appositives can and frequently do occur in other slots. Now, in initial position, they can sound like this. And here I have two beautiful examples from real literature. The first one is from one of my very favorite prose quotes. Remote from universal nature and living by complicated artifice, man in civilization surveys the creature through the glass of his knowledge and sees thereby a feather magnified and the whole image in distortion. See, the two predicate appositives have been front shifted. And so man in civilization is remote from universal nature. He lives by complicated artifice. And therefore he surveys the creature through the glass of his, and he surveys the creature through the glass of his knowledge and sees thereby a feather magnified. So these two elements that appear like substructures are really the two structures that are dominant, I think, and that really draw attention to themselves. And I think they're especially powerful in initial position. Blinded by the glare of the headlights and confused by the incessant groaning of the horns, the apparition stood swaying for a moment before he perceived the man in the duster. It's from one of my favorite novels, The Great Gatsby. I think it's from chapter 2. So here we have an interesting phenomenon. We have a compound predicate appositive. So we have blinded and confused as the heads of the structures. And then we have another one in final position. So the main clause, the apparition stood, is framed or inframed by these two structures. And then an adverbial subclause is added. In medial position, Anne, sticking entertainment tax stamps on the green and orange tickets, oops, and now you can't see that, I hope it'll listening to her mother's rich, lazy, ironical voice, frowned. That's an interesting thing. Here we have a very short main clause, which has been split in half and then has been interrupted by these two very large predicate appositives. I think it's very interesting. And please notice what that does. And then we have all this information of what she's doing of what she is what she's busy with while she's doing the main action, which is to frown. But we don't know yet what the main verb will be, so there's suspense. And then we have this very famous first sentence from a very famous novel, Emma, handsome, clever, and rich, an adjective phrase, with a comfortable home and a happy disposition, a prep phrase, and both these constructions serve as predicate appositives, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence. And then it's ... Actually, the sentence goes on from that, but I wanted to show you two examples of predicate appositives in medial position. Now, some predicate appositives are movable, and we just saw that they can be moved into an initial or medial position, and some are not. Now, whether they are movable or not depends on their own and their sentence's rhythmic, semantic, and syntactic architecture. And that is tricky, especially for learners of English. And as always, I can only recommend read like a champion, and eventually you will acquire a sense for how things go, or where structures can be placed. I should be more precise. But I will give you a little bit of an idea here. I returned home is your basic main clause, and to that I can add these predicate appositives. I returned home drunk. I returned home in my pajamas. I returned home coughing horribly. I returned home singing and dancing and over the moon with happiness. And now notice that the number 4 and 5, the predicate appositives in number 4 and 5 are a little bit longer, and rhythmically they sound good in initial position. Coughing horribly, I returned home. But also notice how the emphasis gets shifted. I returned home, coughing horribly, is a little bit different from, requires a different reading technique or organizes your attention a little bit differently than coughing horribly, I returned home. And neither one is better or worse. It really depends on the architecture of the paragraph in which this is, and also on the architecture of the story. In certain situations, one will be better than the other, and we can't judge that out of context. And usually I love to look at syntax in context. But, before we can look at syntax in context, we need to be clear on what the elements are that we can evaluate. And so I always use sentences as springboards to explain grammar concepts, but then I move on and explain styles and language with the help of the building blocks in context. And that's why the book that I wrote is also in 4 parts. In the first part, I present the structures. In the second part, I talk about style. In the third part, I then apply all that people have learned to real texts. And in the fourth one, I provide summaries. Okay, so let me read these again, where I have front shifted the predicate appositives. Coughing horribly, I returned home. Singing and dancing and over the moon with happiness, I returned home. Now, if we add a adverb to the predicate or insert an adverb into the predicate appositive, then it becomes rhythmically more interesting, and then I can also front shift this. So instead of saying I returned home drunk, I returned home, that's really sounds like inversion. It sounds a little bit forced, but if I say completely drunk, I returned home, it starts sounding good. So please take note of that. And then sometimes front shifted, or especially predicate appositives in medial position, don't sound so good when we have a pronoun, especially the first person pronoun. I, completely drunk, returned home sounds horrible. And most writers wouldn't use that unless they want to sound horrible on purpose, which sometimes one needs to do. But, when we have like a complex noun phrase, the funny old man, completely drunk and whatever, returned to the house. Then that might sound really good. So you have the basic elements that are the same, but they're realized by different structures, and then depending on those structures as that function as subjects, you can do something or not do something. So keep your ears on alert and just watch what gifted writers do, and watch what writers do that you love and find very successful, and then play around with it. Okay, now I want to turn to the German predicate appositives, and later I'll return to English ones, but by way of comparing the two languages. So if you don't know German, I guess we will part ways here, and you can look for more videos where I just talk about English. Predicate appositives are often ignored in German grammar classrooms. When they are not ignored, they are sometimes called fakultative Subjektprädikative or freie Subjektprädikative, and sometimes sekundäre Prädikate and even Prädikative Attribute. Yeah. Frequently, they are mistaken for adverbials, and that's a big thing. Most people I know will confuse predicate appositives and adverbials. Most Germans that I know don't even know that predicate appositives exist, but they use them. So here are two examples. Der Mann läuft singend die Straße entlang. Oma sitzt glücklich in der Badewanne. When I was young, we played this game where you said Oma sitzt quietschend oder Oma sitzt grunzend in der Badewanne. For those of you who are as old as I am or older, you will know that game. That was a little side note. Okay, here in comparison are examples of German adverbials. Der Mann läuft schnell die Straße entlang. Der Mann läuft leise die Straße entlang. Oma sitzt schon lange in der Badewanne. Oma sitzt bequem in der Badewanne. Now, the tricky thing is that the position of predicate appositives and adverbials is the same. And both of them can be front shifted. But I'll show you in a minute. Now, let me show it to you now and then go back to this other slide. I should have put them in reverse order. So we can say, singend läuft der Mann die Straße entlang. Compare that to der Mann läuft singend die Straße entlang. And remember, I made a video about that. In a main clause, the finite verb is always in position 2 in German. And so when you move an adverbial or a predicate appositive into position 1, then you bump the subject into the slot behind the finite verb. So compare these. Der Mann läuft singend die Straße entlang. Singend läuft der Mann die Straße entlang. Glücklich sitzt Oma in der Badewanne. And you can do the same with the adverbials. Schnell läuft der Mann die Straße entlang. Leise läuft der Mann die Straße entlang. Bequem sitzt Oma in der Badewanne. Okay, now let's go here and look at how else we could express the same meaning. Der Mann läuft singend die Straße entlang is your original sentence. And then if we want to express this, express what's been expressed with the predicate appositive with a clause, we would say, der Mann singt, während die Straße entlang läuft. And again, we have the same thing that happened in English, that actually what is expressed with the help of the predicate appositive is put into the main clause, and what is the main clause here becomes the adverbial subclause. And that often happens, and I find that very interesting. Also, der Mann singt, während die Straße entlang läuft. Man könnte es auch in 2 Hauptsätze packen, or you could put it into 2 main clauses. Der Mann läuft die Straße entlang, dabei singt er, und er singt. Oma sitzt glücklich in der Badewanne. Oma ist glücklich, während sie in der Badewanne sitzt. Oma sitzt in der Badewanne und ist glücklich. So in the second version, I chose to put the predicate appositive information into a main clause and then add the main clause information in an adverbial subclause. And in the third sentence here, I went for the compound construction, 2 main clauses. And so you see how dominant and powerful predicate appositives actually are. And you see now the sentences with the adverbials cannot really be turned into two. There are not two prepositions in those. Der Mann läuft schnell. We can rather say that the verb is a variation of the basic verb laufen. Laufen is to run, to walk. It can be to run, but it can also be to walk. So er läuft auf der Straße can mean he's moving in the street or along the street or down the street. And er läuft schnell, then he's actually running fast. So der Mann läuft schnell die Straße entlang. So we could actually argue that there are two kinds of verbs: laufen, to run and walk, and schnell laufen, to walk fast, to run fast. Der Mann läuft leise die Straße entlang. We would actually have to repeat ourselves. Der Mann läuft die Straße entlang, er läuft schnell. Der Mann läuft leise die Straße entlang, er läuft leise. So we would have to repeat the verb. So that's really interesting. While in these other sentences, we have two different verbs then. So really, when we use a predicate appositive, we have a 2-for-1 solution. And when we have an adverbial, we simply have additional information. We have modification of the information that's in there. Okay, we already covered this one. Now, here are examples from the German novel Letzter Akt, the one that I already held up for you. By Christoph Leuchter, whom I have the honor of knowing personally. It so happens that he seems to have a preference for the predicate appositive in first position, because those are, I read the whole novel. I'm not sure I caught all of them. I'm sure there are some that I overlooked, but the ones that I happened to catch, all but one have the predicate appositive in initial position. Here we have one word that isn't the case. So, stotternd flüchtete er sich von einem Gemeinplatz zum nächsten. Und es war zu spüren, dass er am liebsten jede Silbe zurücknehmen wollte. Gedankenverloren steckte er die andere Hand in die Jackentasche und dort fühlte er etwas. Konzentriert verfolgte er Maries kreisende Bewegungen. Corelli lehnte dankend ab. Träge zwängte sich der Arno unter dem Ponte Vecchio hindurch. Mutterseelen allein spielte sie Himmel und Hölle. And now I want to do the same, I want to play the same game that I played with the English sentences, and I want to convert this, not in order to improve the sentences, God forbid that you think that, just to show you that there are actually two prepositions in one clause. Okay, here's the original sentence. Stotternd flüchtete er sich von einem Gemeinplatz zum nächsten. And just to remind you, I can place the predicate appositive into medial position. And then it sounds like this. Er flüchtete sich stotternd von einem Gemeinplatz zum nächsten. So now all I've done is placed the predicate appositive into medial position. And this is this is the default position. Er flüchtete sich stotternd. And that's an interesting difference to English, where we have where it's basically behind the adverbial and not in front of it. Okay, here is an example of when we really put it in final position, which is not common in German, and you can only do it when it's a longer unit and has more information, and you really want to draw attention to it. So you actually close the main clause and then add that information. And you have to add it with a comma. Er flüchtete sich von einem Gemeinplatz zum nächsten, stotternd und hilflos sich schauend. Then it would sound good, but that's not the original. And again, playing with sentences like this actually really helps you to improve your own writing and to get ideas of what you can do with sentences. Okay, now let me dissolve the original sentence into its two prepositions. Er stotterte, während er sich von einem Gemeinplatz zum nächsten flüchtete. And again, we have this case, the same situation that we had in English, where what is contained, the information that's suggested by the predicate appositive, even though it's just one word, actually becomes the main clause information. And what was the main clause information in the original sentence is the adverbial subclause of time, während sich von einem Gemeinplatz zum nächsten flüchtete. I find that so fascinating. Gedanken verloren steckte die andere Hand in die Jackentasche und dort fühlte etwas. Okay, I didn't play the game where I put the predicate appositive into medial position. I could do it verbally for you. Steckte Gedanken verloren, die andere Tasche in die Jackentasche, die andere Hand in die Jackentasche. Okay, now let me create two propositions. War Gedanken verloren, während die andere Hand in die Jackentasche steckte. Dort fühlte etwas. And I played around with it a little bit more, just for fun and to show you. Let me make this a little bit smaller. It doesn't work. Okay, we did this already. Now what I just did, for those of you who see the replay, I just moved this little window where you see me speaking up into the corner, and sometimes Zoom doesn't pick that up when it records. So I hope that these sentences are visible now. Gedanken verloren, steckte die andere Hand in die Jackentasche. That was our sentence. And now we already had these two. War Gedanken verloren, während die andere Hand in die Jackentasche steckte. And then I split it up into two separate sentences. And then I just showed you here that you can do more. You can say, verlor sich ganz in seinen Gedanken. And that's all, this thing that he was lost in thought. That's just in this one adjective, Gedanken verloren, an adjective that is made from a participle, verlieren, verlor, verloren. It's the past participle, and then it's actually a compound one, lost in thought. But in German we can often stick that into the word. Also, konzentriert verfolgte Maries kreisende Bewegung. And now I was too lazy to color parse the other sentences. Konzentrierte sich auf Maries kreisende Bewegung. Now, I actually did the followed and simply focused on the concentrated. So, konzentrierte sich auf Maries kreisende Bewegungen. War konzentriert, während Maries kreisende Bewegungen verfolgte. There I did the thing again with the main clause and the temporal subclause. Verfolgte Maries kreisende Bewegung. Nahm nichts anderes wahr. So I played around with how else could I say this if I want to move away from the predicate appositive. And again, let me remind you, I'm not trying to improve the original sentence, not at all. I'm showing you how concise this structure is and what somersaults I have to make, as it were, in order to work around it if I want to express that in two separate propositions. Corelli lehnt dankend ab. Corelli bedankte sich und lehnte ab. Or aber lehnte ab. Oops. What happened? Technology. Träge zwängte sich der Arno unter dem Ponte Vecchio hindurch. Der Arno floss langsam und mühsam unter dem Ponte Vecchio hindurch. So träge means it was lethargic, and in this case it's actually not so easy to replace. Unter dem Ponte Vecchio war der Arno träge. Mutterseelenallein spielte sie Himmel und Hölle. Sie war Mutterseelenallein, sie spielte Himmel und Hölle. Okay, this was boring now for those of you who don't know German, if you stuck around. Okay, here we have two examples of absolute phrases as predicate appositives, because German actually also have German has absolute phrases. And the interesting thing is that basic grammars never talk about absolute phrases. I had a really hard time. I have a very wonderful German grammar that's written by an American, by my hero, George Kern. And he mentions absolute phrases. And then I found a Russian website about German where they talk about absolute phrases. But other than that, I actually have never found a discussion of them, which I find very surprising. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Here's an example anyway. Corelli stand am nächsten Morgen als Erster auf und kochte Kaffee. Blätterte in einer Zeitschrift, ging hinaus auf die Terrasse, setzte sich, die Tasse in der Hand. Now, look at my video. I'm going to make a video, but I have a discussion about that in my grammar book, and I point at it a little bit in one of my other videos. An absolute phrase is sort of a verbal snapshot of a situation or of an aspect of the situation that we then add as a descriptive detail. Or it can be a summarizing thing. It doesn't always have to be a snapshot, but it often is. And so we see that. So we hear, you know, he's leafing through the magazine, and then he walks to the porch, and he sits down, cup in hand, you know, and then that means, okay, the zoom lens zooms in, and we see the cup in his hand. And here is an example from the other novel by Christoph Leuchter. Mein erster Versuch war kläglich, und Jack schob mich beiseite, das gemeißelte Lächeln im Gesicht, zu demonstrieren, wie man es richtig machte. And this is this absolute phrase with this certain kind of chiseled smile on his face. That's what it says if you do a verbatim translation or a word-by-word translation, word-for-word translation. And here's an interesting thing. I translated that into English the way I would do it, and then you see that the distribution is a little bit different, and that's very interesting. So this is the original sentence with the absolute phrase, and then I actually see a few interesting things. I wouldn't say my first attempt was dismal. That doesn't sound good. I would say I failed miserably on my first try. And Jack, and now I would actually bring this information in as a predicate appositive, trying to show me how to do it properly, shoved me aside, a cold smile chiseled on his face. I would actually not talk about a chiseled smile on his face. I would talk about a cold smile chiseled on his face. Maybe that's just me. I am not a writer of fiction, but I am an enthusiastic reader of fiction. Okay, so now what I did is I wanted to show you how how you can spot the difference between an absolute phrase and a participle construction in German. And if you're not sure when you're dealing with a German text whether you're dealing with an absolute phrase or a participle construction, translating it into English can help. Okay, I made up a sentence with tons of predicate appositives. It's not immortal prose, but I think it works very well for as an example. Von Angst vor der Dunkelheit überwältigt, lag sie zitternd wie Espenlaub im Bett. Die Decke bis über die Ohren gezogen, sich eng an ihre Mama kuschelnd. Now look at the very short main clause. She lay in bed. And the interesting thing is that because of German syntax, you know, we have here, if we start with anything other than the subject, the subject gets bumped into a position behind the finite verb form in main clauses. So in English, you don't separate, you usually keep the main clause intact unless you want to try some stylistic, go for some stylistic effects. So she lay in bed is the core clause, the main clause. Sie lag im Bett. But because of all these predicate appositives, you know, the regular predicate appositive interrupts the main clause in German, and in English it does not. And when you have one in initial position, it bumps the subject to a position deeper in the sentence and inside the sentence, and that doesn't happen in English. So that's such a fascinating difference. Okay, and now we see von Angst vor der Dunkelheit überwältigt. Very often or usually, the participle of the participle construction is at the end or towards the end of the structure, and in English it's at the beginning. So that's such an interesting difference. Overwhelmed by fear. Von Angst vor der Dunkelheit überwältigt. And then in English it sounds so much better to bring, you know, she lay in bed shaking like an aspen leaf would be fine, but because we have two other predicate appositives there, that would just be too much. So in German, because the default position is in front of the adverbial, we wouldn't have 3 in a row. But in English, where the predicate appositive couldn't be in front of the adverbial, we would have then 3 in a row, and so I opted to put it into the front and to front shifted. So we have overwhelmed by fear of the dark and shaking like an aspen leaf, she lay in bed. And then comes our absolute phrase, her covers drawn up over her ears, snuggling up to her mom. And now when people see die Decke bis über die Ohren gezogen, gezogen is a participle, sich eng an ihre Mama kuscheln, kuscheln is a participle, so people might think, hang on, this is a participle construction and this is a participle construction, why are you calling this an absolute phrase? But the difference is, look at this, and when we translate that, it becomes so obvious. Now, sich eng an ihre Mama gekuschelt, here we have the participle in final position for German, but we have it in initial position for English, snuggling up to her mom. So we clearly see this is a participle construction. And her covers drawn up. Every absolute phrase consists of 2 parts. It has its own little subject, in this case her covers, and then it has its non-finite or verb plus predicate. In this case, it's a non-finite predicate drawn up over her ears. So we have this here. Oh, there's something. I hope you don't hear that. Somebody is very noisy in the apartment above us. Okay, so here, and it starts with the subject, and we have that die Decke here. And so when we translate that, we see the noun remains. What is the subject of the absolute phrase remains in the same position in the two in the 2 versions. Die Decke bis über die Ohren gezogen, her covers drawn up over her ears. And so we see that this is an absolute phrase. I hope this was clear. I think and trust it was clear for those of you who know English and German well. And if I didn't make myself clear enough, you have any questions, put them into the description box below, and I will be so happy to answer them. Okay, whatever I've talked about actually is discussed in my grammar book, The Joy of Syntax. Hang on, I'm going to bring my little thing back here. Okay, now The Joy of Syntax and the Zen of Grammar Practice. Here we go. And that's the book. And I'm actually about to launch a course that goes along with this book. It's going to take me 4 more weeks about to start. So if you're interested in that, go and sign up for my newsletter, because I will keep you abreast of the development. I'm going to offer my English in color classes first, and then that's going to happen in 2 weeks or so. And then 4 weeks later, I'm going to start the Joy of Syntax grammar class. And meanwhile, you could buy my book, or you could actually book a one-on-one session with me, and I also offer group coachings. Okay, that was it for today. I hope that you enjoyed this little lecture, mini lecture. I certainly enjoyed making it, and I would be happy to see you again in the next video. So I'm going to say bye-bye and have a lovely evening if it's evening for you.